The sun was just starting to rise over Los Angeles as one of the most recognizable figures in music stepped onto a flight bound for London. Snoop Dogg, the legendary rapper known for his smooth flow and even smoother personality, walked through the airport with his signature swagger. People turned their heads, some snapping quick photos, others whispering excitedly to their companions. But despite the attention, he carried himself like someone who had been doing this for decades, calm, confident, and unfazed by the chaos around him. When he reached the gate, a flight attendant greeted him warmly and escorted him to his seat in first class. The cabin was quiet at first, filled mostly with business travelers flipping through documents or scrolling on their phones. Snoop took his seat near the window, adjusting his headphones and pulling out a book. He wasn't looking for drama. All he wanted was a peaceful flight to recharge before his next big performance overseas. But peace wasn't exactly what awaited him that day. As more passengers boarded, an older man wearing a pilot's uniform appeared. His face was stern, his posture rigid, and he carried himself like someone used to being in charge. The airline had upgraded him to first class because the cockpit crew section was full, a common practice. But it quickly became clear that this man wasn't thrilled about sharing space with everyone else. He scanned the rows, his eyes landing on Snoop almost immediately. For a brief moment, his expression softened into something resembling curiosity, but then it hardened again, replaced by something colder. Without saying a word, the pilot settled into the seat across the aisle from Snoop. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The usual pre-flight announcements played, and the hum of conversation filled the air as people settled in. But as the plane taxied down the runway, things began to shift. The pilot glanced over at Snoop again, this time letting out a low scoff under his breath. It was subtle enough that most people might have missed it, but Snoop caught it. His eyebrow lifted slightly, though he didn't react beyond that. He knew better than to let small jabs get under his skin. As the plane climbed higher into the sky, the tension grew thicker. The pilot leaned back in his seat, arms crossed tightly against his chest, muttering something barely audible. A few nearby passengers strained to hear, catching fragments of words like entitled and doesn't belong. Though he didn't say anything directly to Snoop yet, the tone was unmistakable. It was clear the man had opinions, and they weren't friendly ones. Snoop kept his focus elsewhere, nodding along to the beat playing softly in his ears. He'd dealt with situations like this before, both in his personal life and during his rise to fame. Racism wasn't new to him, nor were the thinly veiled insults disguised as casual remarks. Still, there was something particularly grating about encountering it here, thousands of feet above the ground, where there was no escape until the wheels touched down again. For now, Snoop chose to ignore it. He flipped a page in his book, pretending not to notice the growing hostility radiating from across the aisle. Around them, other passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Some recognized the tension brewing but opted to stay silent, unsure of how, or if, they should intervene. Others buried themselves deeper into their own distractions, hoping the situation would resolve itself without escalating further. What none of them realized was that this was only the beginning. The pilot's grumbles grew louder as the flight attendants began their meal service. At first it seemed like harmless complaining, comments about the food options or the temperature of the cabin, but soon, his words took a sharper turn. He muttered something under his breath about people who don't deserve to be here, glancing pointedly at Snoop as he said it. A few passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably in their seats, pretending not to hear, but the tension was becoming impossible to ignore. Snoop, however, remained unfazed. He sipped his drink slowly, keeping his focus on the view outside the window. If the pilot wanted to stir up trouble, Snoop wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of reacting. But the man wasn't done. Emboldened by the lack of response, he leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying just enough for those seated around him to catch every word. "First class is supposed to be for professionals," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Not performers." The jab landed and the cabin fell eerily quiet. Even the flight attendants paused mid-service, unsure of how to proceed. The pilot's comment hung heavy in the air, sharp and unmistakable. It wasn't just an insult, it was a calculated dig meant to provoke. For a moment, no one dared to breathe. All eyes darted between the two men, waiting to see what would happen next. But Snoop didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he turned slightly in his seat, meeting the pilot's gaze with a calmness that felt almost unnerving. There was no anger in his expression, no sign of offense. Just a quiet confidence that seemed to say, "You're wasting your time." With a small smirk, he simply replied, "Man, I'm just trying to enjoy my flight. Don't let me ruin your day." His voice was soft but firm, cutting through the tension like a knife. If anything, the pilot looked more irritated now. Clearly, he had expected some kind of reaction, a flash of anger, maybe even a confrontation. But Snoop's cool demeanor threw him off balance. Still, he wasn't ready to back down. As the meal trays were cleared away, he flagged down a flight attendant and ordered a drink. When it arrived, a double whiskey, he downed it quickly, signaling for another almost immediately. The alcohol seemed to loosen his tongue further, and before long, he was speaking louder, his comments growing increasingly aggressive. "Think you belong here?" he sneered, leaning towards Snoop this time. "People like you only get these seats because of handouts. You didn't earn it." The words were harsh, laced with prejudice, and they sent a ripple of discomfort through the cabin. Passengers exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. Some shifted awkwardly in their seats, while others shot disapproving looks at the pilot, hoping he'd take the hint and stop. Snoop, for his part, didn't flinch. He set his glass down gently on the tray table and turned to face the man fully. "Listen," he said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that silenced everyone within earshot. "I've worked hard for everything I've got. Nobody handed me nothing. So if you're mad about where I'm sitting, maybe you should check yourself before you start throwing shade." The pilot blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the response. For a split second, it seemed like he might actually back off. But then his pride kicked in, and instead of retreating, he doubled down. "Hard work?" he scoffed, his voice rising. "What do you know about hard work? Singing songs and making noise doesn't count." That comment drew audible gasps from several passengers. One woman shook her head in disbelief, muttering, "This is ridiculous," loud enough for those around her to hear. Another passenger, seated a few rows behind, leaned forward to whisper to his companion, "Doesn't he realize who he's talking to?" Snoop, meanwhile, kept his composure. He leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms casually, as if the whole situation was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "You can think whatever you want," he said calmly. "But I ain't gonna sit here and let you disrespect me without saying something back. Cool?" The pilot opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a flight attendant stepped in. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and asked politely if everything was okay. It was a subtle intervention, a way to diffuse the tension without escalating things further. The pilot hesitated, glaring at Snoop one last time before nodding, stiffly and turning back to his seat. For a few minutes, the cabin returned to a tense silence. Passengers resumed their conversations in hushed tones, though many couldn't resist stealing glances at the two men. The atmosphere felt charged, like the calm before a storm. Everyone knew the confrontation wasn't over. It was only a matter of time before something gave. And sure enough, as the hours ticked by, the pilot's behavior grew more erratic. He continued drinking, his earlier restraint slipping away entirely. Each sip seemed to fuel his anger, and soon he was muttering audibly again, his words sharp and bitter. He gestured wildly at times, pointing vaguely in Snoop's direction, though he didn't speak directly to him anymore. The other passengers watched nervously, bracing themselves for what might come next. No one could have predicted exactly how far things would spiral, or how unforgettable the outcome would be. The pilot's behavior was becoming harder to ignore. By now he had polished off 3 drinks, and it was clear the alcohol was taking its toll. His face was flushed, his words slurred, and his movements jerky as he shifted in his seat. But what made everyone truly uneasy was the way his anger kept bubbling to the surface. Every few minutes he'd mutter something under his breath or glare at Snoop with a mix of contempt and frustration. It was like watching a pot of water simmer on the stove. Everyone knew it was only a matter of time before it boiled over. Snoop, on the other hand, remained the picture of calm. He adjusted his headphones, closed his eyes for a moment, and seemed to tune out the growing tension around him. To anyone watching, it looked like he was completely unfazed by the pilot's antics. But those who paid close attention could see the subtle signs, the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers drummed lightly against the armrest. He wasn't oblivious. He was biding his time, waiting to see how far this would go. And then it happened. The pilot, clearly losing control of himself, leaned forward suddenly and pointed a finger directly at Snoop. "You think you're better than everyone else, don't you?" He spat, his voice loud enough to turn heads across the cabin. Passengers froze mid-conversation, their eyes darting toward the source of the commotion. Even the flight attendants paused, exchanging worried looks as they debated whether to intervene again. For a moment, Snoop didn't respond. He simply opened his eyes, removed his headphones, and stared at the man across the aisle. There was no fear in his expression, no hesitation, just a quiet intensity that commanded respect. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but carried an authority that silenced the entire plane. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," he said evenly. "But I do know one thing. You're embarrassing yourself right now. And trust me, everybody here sees it." The comment hit like a punch. The pilot blinked, taken aback by the directness of the response. For a split second, it seemed like he might actually back down. But pride, and maybe too much whiskey, got the better of him. Instead of retreating, he stood up abruptly, swaying slightly as he did so. "Don't talk to me like that," he snapped, his voice rising even higher. "You don't get to judge me." Now, all eyes were glued to the scene, unfolding in first class. Some passengers instinctively leaned away, trying to put distance between themselves and the escalating confrontation. Others sat frozen in their seats, unsure of what to do. A few brave souls glanced toward the flight attendants, silently pleading for them to step in before things spiraled further out of control. But before anyone could act, the pilot made a move no one saw coming. In his drunken state, he lunged forward, reaching out as if to grab Snoop's arm. The sudden motion sent a wave of panic through the cabin. Gasps echoed, and someone near the back cried out, "What's happening?" For a brief moment, chaos reigned supreme. Yet Snoop didn't flinch. With effortless precision, he blocked the pilot's clumsy attempt, pushing the man's hand away without breaking a sweat. Then in one fluid motion, he rose from his seat, towering over the pilot with an imposing presence that left no room for doubt. He wasn't about to be intimidated. The pilot stumbled backward, caught off guard by the sheer force of Snoop's composure and stature. "Hey, man," Snoop said firmly, his tone shifting from calm to commanding. "You want to act crazy? That's your call. But let me make one thing crystal clear. You're not going to disrespect me, especially not in front of these people. So why don't you sit down and cool off before you embarrass yourself even more?" "Do." Words hung heavy in the air, each syllable dripping with conviction. The pilot hesitated, his bravado crumbling under the weight of Snoop's unwavering confidence. For the first time since boarding the plane, he looked uncertain, almost vulnerable. Slowly, reluctantly, he sank back into his seat, avoiding eye contact with anyone around him. The cabin erupted into murmurs as the reality of what had just transpired sank in. Passengers exchanged wide-eyed glances, some nodding approvingly at Snoop's handling of the situation, while others whispered about the pilot's shocking behavior. One older woman leaned over to her companion and muttered, "That man has no business being in first class if he can't handle himself." Meanwhile, the flight attendants sprang into action. Two of them approached the pilot cautiously, speaking in hushed tones as they tried to assess the situation. Another attendant hurried to check on Snoop, offering a polite apology and asking if there was anything he needed. He waved her off with a reassuring smile, saying softly, "I'm good. Just keep an eye on him, all right?" As the initial shock began to fade, the mood in the cabin shifted. What had started as a tense standoff had transformed into something else entirely. Passengers who had been mere spectators moments earlier now found themselves drawn into the drama, their emotions running high. Some applauded quietly, showing their support for Snoop's restraint and dignity. Others openly criticized the pilot, shaking their heads in disbelief at his behavior. Even the crew seemed divided, while some maintained professionalism, quietly, working to restore order. Others couldn't hide their disapproval of the pilot's actions. One attendant in particular shot him a sharp look as she passed by, her lips pressed into a thin line. It was clear that the man's reputation among the staff was already tarnished, and the flight hadn't even landed yet. Despite the lingering tension, there was also a sense of relief. The worst appeared to be over, thanks in large part to Snoop's ability to de-escalate the situation without resorting to aggression. His calm demeanor and quick thinking had not only diffused the immediate threat, but also earned him the admiration of nearly everyone on board. Yet, as the plane continued its journey across the Atlantic, questions lingered in the minds of the passengers. How would the airline handle this incident? Would the pilot face consequences for his actions? And perhaps most importantly, what message would this unforgettable encounter send to the world beyond the confines of the aircraft? Little did they know the story was far from over. As the plane cruised through the sky, the atmosphere in first class remained tense but oddly charged. Passengers were still processing what had just happened, their emotions a mix of disbelief, admiration, and unease. Snoop returned to his seat, his movements calm and deliberate, as if silently signaling to everyone that the situation was under control. He adjusted his headphones again, leaned back slightly, and closed his eyes, exuding an aura of quiet strength. But despite his composed demeanor, it was clear he was fully aware of the lingering tension and the weight of the moment. Meanwhile, the pilot sat slumped in his chair, his face red with embarrassment and alcohol. His earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by a palpable sense of shame. He avoided making eye contact with anyone, staring blankly at the floor as if trying to disappear. The flight attendants hovered nearby, keeping a close watch on him while discreetly ensuring Snoop felt supported. One attendant even brought him a fresh drink, a small gesture of gratitude for handling the situation with such grace. But the drama wasn't confined to first class anymore. Word had spread quickly among the passengers seated farther back in the cabin. A businessman who'd overheard fragments of the confrontation whispered details to his neighbor, who then passed them along to someone else. Within minutes, the story had traveled like wildfire, reaching nearly every corner of the plane. People craned their necks trying to catch a glimpse of Snoop or the pilot, eager to see how things would unfold. Social media soon became the next battleground. A young woman seated in economy class pulled out her phone and began typing furiously. "OMG, something wild is happening on my flight," she wrote in a tweet. "A pilot just attacked Snoop Dogg in first class, but Snoop handled it like a boss. More updates soon." She hit send before snapping a few photos of the scene from afar, careful not to draw attention to herself. Within seconds, her post gained traction, racking up likes and retweets as curious followers begged for more information. Others joined in, sharing their own accounts of the incident. Someone posted a blurry video of the aftermath, capturing the pilot's defeated posture and the murmurs of disapproval rippling through the cabin. Another passenger uploaded a photo of Snoop sitting calmly in his seat, captioning it, "True legend energy right here." Hashtags like Snoop Dogg flight and respect started trending, turning what had been a private altercation into a global conversation. Back on the plane, the ripple effects of the incident continued to play out. Several passengers approached Snoop during a brief stretch break, offering words of support and praise. "You handled that beautifully," one man said sincerely, shaking his hand. "Not many people could have kept their cool like you did." Snoop smiled warmly, thanking him but downplaying the situation. "It is what it is," he replied with a shrug. "I wasn't about to let negativity ruin my day." The pilot, however, wasn't receiving the same kind of sympathy. As news of his behavior spread throughout the cabin, other travelers began confronting him directly, A middle-aged woman seated near him leaned over and said pointedly, "You should be ashamed of yourself." That was completely uncalled for. Another passenger chimed in, adding, "What you did was racist and unacceptable. I hope your bosses hear about this." Each comment seemed to chip away at whatever dignity the man had left, leaving him visibly shaken. Even the flight crew couldn't hide their disappointment. While they maintained professionalism, their body language spoke volumes. They avoided engaging with the pilot unless absolutely necessary, focusing instead on tending to the needs of the other passengers. When meal service resumed, no one offered him another drink. Not that he asked for one. Instead, he sat in silence, his earlier arrogance replaced by a hollow emptiness. As the hours ticked by, the mood on the plane shifted once again. What had started as shock and anger gave way to reflection. Conversations broke out among passengers, some debating the broader implications of the incident. "This isn't just about one guy losing his temper," a college student remarked to her seatmate. "It's about racism and entitlement. People like him think they can get away with treating others badly because of where they come from or what they look like." Others nodded in agreement, sharing their own experiences of discrimination and prejudice. For many, the confrontation served as a catalyst, sparking discussions they might not have otherwise had. And while opinions varied, there was one thing everyone seemed to agree on. Snoop's response had been nothing short of inspiring. By refusing to stoop to the pilot's level, he had turned a potentially explosive situation into a powerful lesson in dignity and self-control. By the time the plane began its descent into London, anticipation filled the air. Passengers gathered, their belongings, whispering excitedly about what awaited them on the ground. Rumors circulated that airport authorities had been alerted and were prepared to take action against the pilot. Some hoped he'd be arrested on the spot. Others simply wanted him held accountable in some way. Regardless of the outcome, it was clear the man's career and reputation were in serious jeopardy. When the wheels touched down at Heathrow Airport, the energy aboard the aircraft reached a fever pitch. Reporters and cameras swarmed the terminal, tipped off by social media posts and eager to document the unfolding drama. As the doors opened and passengers disembarked, cheers erupted when Sippy stepped off the plane. People clapped and shouted words of encouragement, celebrating not only his music but also his poise under pressure. He waved graciously, acknowledging the crowd without saying much, letting his actions speak for themselves. Behind him, the pilot exited quietly, escorted by security personnel who shielded him from view. No one applauded for him. Instead, boos and jeers followed him as he disappeared into the terminal, swallowed by the consequences of his choices. For Snoop, though, the journey was far from over. The incident had thrust him into the spotlight once again, but this time not just as an entertainer. He had become a symbol of resilience, proving that true strength lies not in retaliation, but in rising above hatred. And as the world watched, waiting to see what he'd do next, one thing was certain. The impact of that flight would resonate far beyond the confines of the airplane. As Snoop stepped off the plane and into the bustling terminal, the scene was electric. Dozens of reporters jostled for position, their cameras flashing like strobe lights as they shouted questions from every direction. "How are you feeling?" "After what happened?" one asked. "What do you have to say to the pilot?" another chimed in. The noise was overwhelming, but Snoop handled it with the same calm he'd shown throughout the entire ordeal. He raised a hand slightly, signaling for quiet, and when the crowd finally settled down enough for him to speak, his words were simple, yet profound. "I'm not here to fuel negativity," he said, his voice steady and clear despite the chaos around him. "What happened on that flight is bigger than me or that man. It's about how we treat each other as human beings. Hate doesn't solve anything. It only shows weakness. I choose love. Always." With that, he offered a small smile, nodded respectfully, and walked away, leaving the reporters scrambling to capture his parting words. The statement struck a chord. In an age where social media often amplifies division and hostility, Snoop's message felt refreshingly authentic. People listening online or watching clips of the interview couldn't help but admire his ability to rise above the situation without resorting to bitterness. Comments poured in, praising his wisdom and restraint. "This is why I respect him so much," one fan tweeted. "Not just because of his music, but because of who he is as a person." Meanwhile, the pilot faced a very different reception. As security led him through the terminal, he kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Reporters tried to get close, shouting questions at him too, but unlike Snoop, he didn't stop to address them. His silence spoke volumes. Guilt, shame, and regret etched across his face. Passengers who had witnessed the incident earlier shared their accounts with journalists, painting a vivid picture of his behavior during the flight. By the time airport authorities whisked him away for questioning, public opinion had already turned decisively against him. News outlets picked up the story almost immediately, dissecting every detail of the confrontation. Headlines ranged from "sensational, pilot's racist outburst sparks chaos on international flight," to reflective, "Snoop Dogg's grace under fire inspires millions." Social media platforms lit up with debates, memes, and heartfelt messages. Some users criticized the airline for allowing such behavior from its staff, while others demanded accountability, not just for the pilot, but for the systemic issues his actions represented. For many, the incident served as a wake-up call. Conversations about racism, privilege, and discrimination dominated timelines and comment sections worldwide. People began sharing personal stories of similar encounters, moments when they'd been treated unfairly because of their race, appearance, or background. A young woman recounted being ignored by a store clerk while a white customer received preferential treatment. A businessman described being pulled aside for extra screening at an airport simply because of his name. Each story added layers to the broader conversation, reminding everyone that what happened on that flight wasn't an isolated event. It was a symptom of a much larger problem. Amidst all the noise, Snoop remained focused on using his platform for good. Over the next few days, he appeared on several talk shows, not to rehash the drama but to emphasize the importance of kindness and understanding. "We're all human," he told one host. "At the end of the day, we've got to figure out how to live together no matter where we come from or what we look like. That starts with treating each other with respect." His words resonated deeply, sparking initiatives aimed at promoting unity and empathy. Schools incorporated discussions about the incident into their lesson plans, encouraging students to reflect on how they interact with others. Community leaders organized events centered around themes of acceptance and inclusivity, inspired by Snoop's example. Even corporations took notice, with some airlines pledging to implement stricter policies against discriminatory behavior among employees. But it wasn't just institutions that responded. Ordinary people found ways to make a difference too. A group of passengers from the flight started a crowdfunding campaign to support organizations combating racism and prejudice. Within hours, donations poured in from around the globe, far exceeding their initial goal. Others volunteered their time to mentor young people, teaching them the value of compassion and resilience. It was as if the ripple effects of that single confrontation kept expanding, touching lives in unexpected ways. Of course, not everyone agreed with the narrative that emerged. Some defended the pilot, arguing that alcohol had clouded his judgment and that he deserved a second chance. Others dismissed the incident altogether, claiming it was blown out of proportion for clicks and views. But even these dissenting voices contributed to the dialogue, forcing people to examine their own biases and assumptions. Through it all, Snoop stayed true to himself. He declined lucrative offers to monetize the incident, refusing to cash in on someone else's downfall. Instead, he redirected attention toward positive change, urging fans to focus on building bridges rather than walls. "Hate will always try to pull you down," he wrote in a widely shared post. "But love lifts us higher. Choose wisely." By the time the dust began to settle, the impact of that fateful flight was undeniable. The pilot's career was effectively over, his actions having cost him not only his job but also his reputation. Airlines implemented new training programs to address discrimination and improve customer service, recognizing the need for systemic reform. And Snoop? He emerged stronger than ever. not just as an artist, but as a beacon of hope in a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding. Yet perhaps the most remarkable outcome was the sense of connection the incident fostered. Strangers bonded over shared outrage, admiration, and determination to create a better future. For a brief moment, humanity came together, not in anger, but in solidarity. And while the road ahead remained long and challenging, one thing was certain. The lessons learned aboard that flight would continue to inspire change for years to come. In the days following the incident, the story continued to dominate headlines, but it wasn't just about what had happened on the plane anymore. It had evolved into something much bigger, a catalyst for meaningful conversations and tangible action. Social media played a huge role in keeping the momentum alive, with hashtags like You Choose Love and You Rise Above trending globally. People from all walks of life chimed in, sharing their thoughts, experiences, and hopes for a more inclusive world. The viral nature of the event turned it into a movement, one that resonated far beyond the confines of the airline industry. Snoop remained at the center of it all, though he made it clear he didn't want the spotlight solely for himself. During an appearance on a popular morning show, he used his platform to highlight stories of everyday heroes, ordinary people doing extraordinary things to combat racism and prejudice. He spoke about a teacher who dedicated her weekends to tutoring underprivileged kids, giving them tools to succeed despite systemic barriers. He highlighted a restaurant owner who fed homeless families every night, no questions asked. Each story was a reminder that change doesn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it's the small acts of kindness that make the biggest difference. "I'm not special because I stood up for myself," Snoop said during the interview. "What matters is how we lift each other up when times get tough. That's where real power comes from." His words struck a chord, inspiring viewers to reflect on their own roles in creating a better society. Calls poured into the show afterward, with listeners eager to share how they plan to contribute, whether by volunteering, donating, or simply being more mindful in their daily interactions. The airline involved also faced mounting pressure to address the fallout. Passengers who had been on the flight wrote letters to the company's CEO, demanding accountability not just for the pilot but for the culture that allowed such behavior to go unchecked. One letter, signed by over 50 passengers, read, "What happened on our flight wasn't an isolated incident. It was a reflection of deeper issues within your organization. We urge you to take this seriously and implement changes that ensure everyone feels safe and respected while traveling." To its credit, the airline responded swiftly. Within 48 hours, they released a public statement condemning the pilot's actions and announcing immediate termination of his employment. They also pledged to review their training protocols, emphasizing diversity, equity, and inclusion. A spokesperson explained, "We understand the gravity of what occurred and are committed to ensuring this never happens again. Our passengers deserve better, and we will do everything in our power to regain their trust." But the airline didn't stop there. In partnership with advocacy groups, they launched a campaign called Fly with Respect, aimed at fostering a more welcoming environment for travelers of all backgrounds. Posters featuring powerful messages like "Kindness knows no borders" appeared in terminals worldwide, alongside workshops designed to educate staff on recognizing and addressing discriminatory behavior. Pilots, flight attendants, and ground crew alike participated in these sessions, many admitting they had never fully grasped the impact of unconscious bias until now. While some critics dismissed these efforts as performative, others acknowledged the importance of starting somewhere. As one passenger commented online, "Change doesn't happen overnight, but at least they're trying. That's more than most companies would do." Meanwhile, the pilot's fate became a topic of heated debate. Some argued that firing him was too harsh, insisting he deserved a chance to learn from his mistakes. Others felt strongly that his actions warranted severe consequences, given the harm caused. Lost in much of the discussion, however, was the toll the incident took on the man himself. Reports surfaced that he had checked into a rehabilitation facility, citing both alcohol dependency and emotional distress. Whether this move was genuine or an attempt to salvage his reputation remained unclear, but it added another layer of complexity to the narrative. For Snoop, the focus remained firmly on moving forward. He traveled to London not just for work, but to connect with local communities affected by racism and inequality. At a youth center in Brixton, he spent hours talking with teenagers, listening to their struggles and offering advice based on his own journey. "I've been where you are," he told them. "People tried to tell me I wouldn't amount to anything because of where I came from, but I refused to let their negativity define me. You can do the same." His presence brought joy and inspiration to everyone he met. Kids lined up for photos, teachers expressed gratitude for his involvement, and even skeptical parents admitted they walked away feeling hopeful. One mother summed it up perfectly. "He didn't just show up and leave, he really cared. That means so much to us." Back home, the ripple effects of the incident kept spreading. Schools incorporated lessons about empathy and conflict resolution into their curriculums, using Snoop's response as a case study in leadership. Corporations revisited their diversity policies, ensuring they aligned with modern values. Even casual conversations between friends and coworkers began shifting, with more people openly discussing topics like privilege, bias, and allyship. Yet perhaps the most profound impact was felt on an individual level. Countless people reported feeling empowered to speak out against injustice after witnessing Snoop's composure and conviction. A young woman shared how she finally confronted her boss about discriminatory remarks, drawing strength from his example. A father recounted teaching his son the importance of standing up for others, using the flight incident as a teaching moment. These personal transformations may have gone unnoticed by the wider world, but collectively, they represented a seismic shift toward greater understanding and accountability. As weeks turned into months, the initial frenzy surrounding the story began to fade, replaced by quieter, more sustained efforts to drive lasting change. Snoop returned to his music and projects, occasionally posting updates about the initiatives he supported. The airline continued rolling out reforms, earning cautious praise from advocacy groups. And though the pilot largely disappeared from public view, his story served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked prejudice and entitlement. Through it all, one truth remained undeniable. The events of that flight had touched lives in ways no one could have predicted. What started as a tense confrontation thousands of feet above the ground had become a global movement grounded in love, respect, and resilience. And while challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, the seeds of progress had been planted, thanks in large part to a legendary artist who chose to rise above hate and inspire millions along the way. Months after the incident, life began to settle into a new rhythm for everyone involved. The headlines about the flight had slowed down, replaced by fresh news cycles and emerging stories. But the impact of what happened that day lingered, woven into the fabric of countless lives in ways both big and small. For Snoop, the experience became more than just a chapter in his life. It evolved into a cornerstone of his legacy, reminding people that true greatness isn't measured by fame or fortune, but by how you handle adversity. Snoop didn't shy away from talking about the incident when asked, but he always framed it as part of a larger conversation. During a charity gala in Los Angeles, he stood on stage, microphone in hand, addressing an audience filled with activists, artists, and everyday folks who looked up to him. "What happened on that plane wasn't about me versus some guy," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "It was about all of us, how we treat each other, how we respond to hate, and how we choose to move forward. I'm not perfect, but I try to lead with love. And if even one person decides to do the same because of something I did, then I've done my job." The crowd erupted into applause, not because they were fans of his music, though many were, but because they saw him as a symbol of hope. That night, donations poured in for the organizations he supported, funding programs focused on education, mental health, and racial equity. It was clear that his actions had inspired others to take action, too. Meanwhile, the airline continued its efforts to rebuild trust. Flyers noticed subtle changes during their trips: a warmer greeting at check-in, a more attentive crew on board, posters promoting inclusivity in terminals. While skepticism still lingered among some passengers, others expressed appreciation for the visible steps being taken. One frequent traveler wrote in a review, "I've flown this airline for years, and lately, I've felt like they're actually listening. They're not perfect, but they're trying, and that counts for something." Behind the scenes, the company worked tirelessly to overhaul its internal culture. Employees participated in workshops led by diversity experts, learning how to identify biases and foster respectful environments. Pilots and cabin crew were encouraged to share feedback anonymously, creating a space where concerns could be addressed without fear of retaliation. Slowly but surely, the workplace dynamic began to shift, with team members feeling more empowered to speak up when something felt off. As for the pilot, his story faded into obscurity. After completing rehab, he reportedly moved to a small town, seeking anonymity and a chance to start over. Rumors swirled about whether he'd found work in another industry or if he lived quietly, grappling with regret. While some wondered about his fate, most agreed that the real focus should remain on preventing similar incidents in the future. His downfall served as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked prejudice and the importance of accountability. But perhaps the most profound changes occurred on a personal level. Passengers who had been on that flight often reflected on how the experience shaped their perspectives. One woman, a mother of two, shared her thoughts in an online forum. "Before, that day I might have stayed silent if I saw someone being treated unfairly. But watching Snoop handle the situation made me realize that speaking up is powerful. Now I don't hesitate to say something when I see injustice. It's scary sometimes, but it's worth it." Others echoed similar sentiments, describing how the incident pushed them to confront their own biases or become better allies. Conversations about race, privilege, and respect entered households and workplaces, sparking growth and understanding. Teachers incorporated lessons about empathy into their classrooms, while friends challenged each other to think critically about societal norms. The ripple effects of that single confrontation kept spreading, touching lives in unexpected ways. For Snoop, the journey reinforced his belief in the power of authenticity. He knew that staying true to himself, not just as an artist but as a human being, was what resonated most deeply with people. In interviews, he often joked about the irony of the situation. "Who would have thought a flight to London would turn into a masterclass on handling drama? Honestly, I just wanted to catch some sleep." His humor lightened the mood, making difficult conversations feel less daunting. Yet beneath the laughter lay a deep sense of purpose. Snoop understood that moments like these carried weight. They had the potential to spark change, no matter how chaotic or uncomfortable they seemed at first. By choosing grace over anger, he showed the world that strength isn't about domination. It's about rising above negativity and inspiring others to do the same. Looking back, the incident became a defining moment, not just for those directly involved, but for anyone who heard the story. It reminded us that every interaction matters, that our choices shape the world around us, and that even in the face of hatred, there's always room for love. The image of Snoop standing tall, calm, and composed amid chaos became etched in public memory, a testament to the enduring power of dignity and resilience. And so the tale of that unforgettable flight ended not with bitterness or division, but with connection and growth. From the passengers who witnessed it firsthand to the millions who followed along online, the story inspired acts of kindness, courage, and unity. It proved that even in turbulent times, humanity has the capacity to rise above, to find light in the darkest moments and turn challenges into opportunities for change. In the end, the lesson was simple yet profound. Hate may grab attention, but love leaves a lasting legacy. And thanks to one man's decision to choose love, the world became just a little bit brighter. Weeks turned into months, and the echoes of that fateful flight continued to reverberate in ways no one could have anticipated. The incident wasn't just a chapter closed. It was a spark that ignited ongoing conversations about humanity, respect, and the choices we make when faced with conflict. For Snoop, it became clear that this moment would forever be part of his story, not because of the drama itself, but because of what he chose to do with it. One sunny afternoon, Snoop found himself sitting in a small community center in South Los Angeles. The room buzzed with energy as dozens of kids gathered around him, eager to hear what he had to say. They weren't there for autographs or selfies. They wanted advice. Many of them came from neighborhoods where opportunities were scarce and challenges abundant, much like the streets Snoop once navigated in his younger years. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and spoke directly to them. "You know, life is going to throw stuff at you," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "People are going to try to bring you down, tell you you're not good enough, or treat you like you don't matter. But here's the thing. You get to decide how you respond. You can let hate win, or you can rise above it. I've been through some tough times, but I learned early on that staying true to yourself is the only way to survive." The kids listened intently, nodding along as if they understood exactly what he meant. One boy raised his hand timidly and asked, "What if people keep being mean? What if they don't stop?" Snoop smiled gently, leaning back slightly before answering. "Sometimes people won't change," he admitted. "But guess what? That's their problem, not yours. Don't let their negativity steal your joy. Focus on who you are and what you want to achieve. Trust me, success speaks louder than any insult ever could." His words resonated deeply, not just with the children but also with the adults present. Parents whispered among themselves, marveling at how effortlessly Snoop connected with the next generation. A local teacher approached him afterward, tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "You gave these kids hope today. Hope they desperately needed." Snoop hugged her warmly, brushing off the gratitude with his signature, humility. "It's all love," he replied. "If I can help even one kid see their worth, then I've done my job." Meanwhile, the airline industry underwent its own transformation. Other carriers took note of the changes implemented by the airline involved in the incident, adopting similar initiatives to promote inclusivity and combat discrimination. Training programs expanded beyond basic customer service to include modules on cultural sensitivity and emotional intelligence. Pilots and crew members began wearing pins that read, "Respect starts here," serving as constant reminders of their commitment to creating safe spaces for travelers. Feedback from passengers reflected the positive shift. In surveys, many expressed feeling more comfortable and respected during flights, noting the extra effort staff made to ensure everyone felt welcome. One elderly woman traveling alone wrote a heartfelt letter to the airline, thanking them for making her journey pleasant despite her initial fears after hearing about the infamous flight. "Your team restored my faith in humanity," she wrote. "For that, I am truly grateful." Back in the spotlight, Snoop used every opportunity to amplify voices often overlooked. He collaborated with grassroots organizations working to dismantle systemic racism, using his influence to shine a light on their efforts. At a music festival later that year, he invited activists on stage to share their work with thousands of cheering fans. "These are the real heroes," he declared, stepping aside to let them take center stage. "They're out here fighting, the good fight every single day. Support them however you can." His actions inspired others to follow suit. Musicians, athletes, and influencers joined forces to create campaigns promoting kindness and unity. Schools launched art projects encouraging students to express their thoughts on overcoming adversity. Even businesses got involved, pledging portions of their profits to causes aligned with equality and justice. It was as if the ripple effects of that one confrontation kept expanding, touching lives in ways both big and small. Yet, amidst all the progress, challenges remained. Racism and prejudice didn't disappear overnight, and incidents of discrimination still occurred, on planes, in schools, and across society. But something had shifted. People were less willing to stay silent, more determined to call out injustice when they saw it. Conversations that might have once been avoided were now happening openly, driven by a collective desire to grow and improve. For Snoop, the biggest reward came in the form of stories shared with him by strangers. After concerts, fans would line up to meet him, not just to shake his hand but to tell him how his response on that flight had impacted their lives. One man recounted how he stood up to a coworker who had made derogatory comments about another employee, drawing strength from Snoop's example. A young woman described how she confronted her landlord about unfair treatment, refusing to back down until the issue was resolved. Each story reinforced the idea that courage is contagious, that one person's actions can inspire countless others to act with integrity and compassion. As time went on, the incident faded from the forefront of public consciousness, replaced by new headlines and emerging narratives. But its legacy endured, woven into the fabric of communities worldwide. Teachers referenced it in classrooms, parents used it as a teaching moment, and social media users revisited videos of Snoop's calm demeanor, finding inspiration in moments of uncertainty. Reflecting on everything that transpired, Snoop remained grounded. He knew the world wasn't perfect, nor would it ever be. But he believed in the power of incremental change, the idea that small acts of kindness and courage could add up to something extraordinary. During an interview near the end of the year, he summed it up perfectly. "We're all works in progress. None of us has all the answers, but we can keep trying to be better, for ourselves, for each other, and for the future. That's all anyone can ask." In the end, the story of that turbulent flight became more than just a tale of conflict and resolution. It became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the face of hatred, love, and dignity can prevail. And thanks to one man's decision to rise above, the world became a little brighter. One kind act, one courageous choice at a time.